But what if that ordinary moment turned into a life-altering encounter? What if, in that instant, your past caught up with you? That's exactly what happened when a woman, seemingly just another shopper, demanded a refund. Little did she know, the cashier behind the counter wasn't just any employee. He was a man with a keen eye, someone who had seen her face before, not in a magazine or on TV, but in a police bulletin. A wanted fugitive, now standing right in front of him. This is the story of how a routine refund request unraveled a web of deception and led to a dramatic confrontation. You might be wondering, how could this happen? How could someone live under the radar for so long, only to be recognized in a seemingly mundane setting? The answer lies in the art of disguise, the psychology of identity, and the persistence of those who seek justice. In this video, we'll delve deep into the case, exploring the woman's past, the events leading up to that fateful day, and the unexpected twist that left everyone stunned. But before we dive in, let me ask you this. Have you ever felt like you were being watched? Or perhaps, like someone knew more about you than they should? It's a chilling thought, isn't it? Now, imagine being on the other side of that equation, living a life built on lies, constantly looking over your shoulder, always wondering when the truth will surface. That's the reality for many fugitives, and this story brings that reality into sharp focus. As we unfold this tale, you'll discover the lengths to which some will go to escape their past, the cracks in their facades, and the moments when everything unravels. You'll meet key players, individuals who, through a combination of luck, intuition, and determination, brought a fugitive to justice. And you'll gain insight into the broader implications of such cases, touching on themes of identity, trust, and the relentless pursuit of truth. So, why should you stick around? Because this isn't just another crime story. It's a real-life thriller that blurs the lines between the ordinary and the extraordinary. It's a reminder that sometimes, the most unexpected places can become the stage for the most dramatic confrontations. And it's a testament to the idea that no matter how well you think you've hidden your past, the truth has a way of finding its way to the surface. Stay with us as we unravel the mystery, piece by piece, and reveal the shocking truth behind the woman who demanded a refund and the cashier who recognized her as a wanted fugitive. Trust me, you won't want to miss this. As the woman stood at the customer service counter, her hands trembling slightly, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The store, a bustling Target in the heart of Blue Ash, Ohio, was unusually quiet for a Thursday afternoon. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow over the rows of neatly arranged merchandise. She had come to return a cartload of items, clothes, electronics, and household goods, but as she approached the counter, a sense of unease settled over her. The cashier, a young man with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, greeted her with a practiced smile. But there was something in his gaze that made her pause. https://www.wsaz.com. Hello, How can I assist you today? He asked, his voice steady but carrying an undertone of something unspoken. She hesitated, her fingers brushing the edges of the receipts she had gathered. I'd like to return these items, she said, her voice betraying a hint of nervousness. The cashier nodded and began scanning the items one by one. As he did, his brow furrowed slightly, and he paused after each scan, his eyes flicking up to meet hers with increasing intensity. She shifted uncomfortably under his scrutiny, wondering if she had perhaps made a mistake in her returns. BBC. +3. Vardigan. +3. eBay. +3. Is everything all right? She asked, attempting to break the growing tension. The cashier didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached for his phone and began typing rapidly. Her heart skipped a beat as she watched him, the weight of the situation beginning to dawn on her. Was he checking her ID? Her purchase history? Or was he doing something else entirely? Minutes passed in silence, the only sound the soft beeping of the scanner and the occasional murmur of other customers in the distance. Finally, the cashier looked up, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry, he said, his tone polite but firm. I need to ask you to step aside for a moment. Confusion and a growing sense of dread washed over her. Had she done something wrong? Was this some kind of misunderstanding? She complied, stepping back from the counter as he motioned for a supervisor. The supervisor arrived shortly, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense attitude. She exchanged a few words with the cashier, her gaze flicking toward the woman with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. The supervisor began, her voice cool and authoritative. "We need to speak with you in private." Panic surged within her. What was happening? Why were they treating her like this? She had simply come to return some items. But as she followed them to a back office, a chilling thought crossed her mind. What if they knew? The door closed behind her with a soft click, sealing her in a small, windowless room. The supervisor took a seat across from her, folding her hands on the desk. The cashier remained standing by the door, his eyes never leaving her. The supervisor began, her voice steady but carrying an edge. "We've been reviewing your returns, and there are some discrepancies." Discrepancies? Her mind raced as she tried to process the words. What could they mean? She had receipts for everything. She had followed all the rules. Hadn't she? BBC. The supervisor continued, outlining the details of her returns, pointing out inconsistencies and patterns that didn't add up. As the conversation unfolded, the woman's heart sank. The items she had returned were not the same as those she had purchased. The receipts were forged. The items themselves were often low value, purchased specifically to facilitate the fraudulent returns. BBC. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She had been part of a scheme, a carefully orchestrated plan to exploit the store's return policy. But who had orchestrated it? Who had pulled the strings? As the supervisor pressed her for answers, the woman struggled to recall the details. She remembered meeting a man, a former employee of the store, who had approached her with the idea. He had claimed that he needed money for his mother's medical bills, that he was desperate. She had agreed to help, thinking it was a harmless favor. WSB-TV Channel 2, Atlanta. But now, in the sterile confines of the back office, the truth was undeniable. She had been used. She had been a pawn in a larger game, manipulated into committing crimes she hadn't fully understood. The supervisor leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "Do you know who this man is?" she asked. The woman's mind raced. She had met him only a few times. He had been charming, persuasive. But his name? His background? She couldn't remember. I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. The supervisor exchanged a look with the cashier, who stepped forward, his expression unreadable. He said, his voice calm but firm, "We need to take you into custody." Shock and disbelief washed over her. This couldn't be happening. She hadn't done anything wrong. She had been trying to help. As the woman sat in the sterile back office, her mind raced, trying to piece together the events that had led her here. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a cold glow on the room's white walls. The supervisor's stern gaze bore into her, but she couldn't focus on the woman's words. Her thoughts were consumed by the realization that her life was unraveling in a way she hadn't anticipated. She had been part of a scheme, yes, but who had orchestrated it? And why had she been chosen? The questions swirled in her mind, but answers remained elusive. The cashier, who had initially recognized her, stood silently by the door, his expression unreadable. She had noticed his eyes flicker with something. Was it recognition? Guilt? Or perhaps something else? She couldn't tell. But as the supervisor continued to question her, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this situation than met the eye. Had the cashier been complicit? Or was he merely a pawn in a larger game? The uncertainty gnawed at her. Then, just as the supervisor was about to call the authorities, the woman received a text message. It was from an unknown number, the message simple yet chilling: "Stop digging. You're in over your head." Her heart skipped a beat. Who could have sent this? And how did they know what she was involved in? The message was a stark warning, but it also raised more questions than it answered. Was someone watching her? Had her every move been anticipated? The supervisor noticed her reaction and raised an eyebrow. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her tone sharp. The woman quickly composed herself, nodding. "No, just a friend checking in," she lied, forcing a smile. The supervisor didn't seem convinced but didn't press further. Instead, she turned to the cashier. "Call the police," she ordered. We need to get this sorted out. As the cashier stepped out to make the call, the woman felt a surge of panic. She had to get out of there. But how? The door was locked, and the supervisor was standing between her and the exit. She scanned the room, looking for an opportunity. Her eyes landed on a small window near the ceiling, just large enough for her to squeeze through. It was a long shot, but it was her only chance. With a deep breath, she stood up, her legs shaky. "I need to use the restroom," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The supervisor eyed her suspiciously but nodded. "Make it quick," she said, her tone curt. The woman nodded and walked toward the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to act fast. Once outside the office, she hurried down the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the empty store. She reached the back door, which led to a small alley behind the building. The door was locked, but she had seen the supervisor unlock it earlier. She fumbled in her pocket for the key she had taken earlier, her fingers trembling. After what felt like an eternity, she managed to unlock the door and slipped outside. The cool night air hit her face as she stepped into the alley. She didn't know where she was going, but she couldn't stay there. She had to disappear, to find a way out of this mess. But as she turned the corner, she froze. Standing at the end of the alley was a figure, a man, tall and imposing. He was watching her, his face obscured by the shadows. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his voice low and menacing. Her blood ran cold. She recognized him. It was the man from her past, the one who had pulled her into this scheme in the first place. The one who had promised her it would be easy, that no one would get hurt. But now, standing before her, he looked anything but trustworthy. She took a step back, her mind racing. What did he want? Had he come to silence her? To make sure she didn't talk? Or was there something else going on? Before she could react, he took a step forward, blocking her path. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, his tone cold. "You should have stayed away." She swallowed hard, trying to steady her breathing. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, but it was a cold, empty smile. "Don't play dumb. You know exactly what I'm talking about." Her mind raced, trying to find a way out. But before she could think of anything, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a phone. "I think it's time we had a little chat," he said, his eyes gleaming with something dark. The woman felt a surge of panic. She had to get away. But how? She was trapped, with no way out. The alley was narrow, and the man was blocking her only escape route. She had to think fast. Suddenly, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her hands shaking, and saw a message from an unknown number. "Don't trust him. He's not who he says he is." Her heart skipped a beat. Who was sending these messages? And why? She looked up at the man, her mind racing. Was he the one behind the messages? Was he trying to manipulate her? Before she could ask, he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You really think you can just walk away from this?" he asked, his voice dripping with menace. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had to stay calm. She had to think. But the walls were closing in, and she didn't know who to trust anymore. As the man reached out toward her, her phone buzzed again. Another message: "Look behind you." She spun around, her heart pounding in her chest. Standing at the entrance to the alley was another figure, a woman, tall and confident, her arms crossed over her chest. "Let her go," the woman said, her voice firm. The man hesitated, his eyes flicking between the woman and the newcomer. "Who are you?" he demanded. The woman didn't answer. Instead, she took a step forward, her gaze unwavering. "I said, let her go." The man looked at her for a long moment, then slowly lowered his hand. "This isn't over," he muttered, before turning and disappearing into the shadows. The woman turned to the newcomer, her heart still racing. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. The woman smiled faintly. "Someone who knows more than you think." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving the woman standing in the alley, more confused and frightened than ever. As she stood there, trying to process what had just happened, her phone buzzed once more. She looked down and saw a new message: "Trust no one." Her mind reeled. Who could she trust? Who was on her side? And who was playing her for a fool? The answers seemed just out of reach, slipping through her fingers like sand. But one thing was certain, she was in deeper than she had ever imagined, and getting out was going to be harder than she thought. Just as the woman stood frozen in that dimly lit alley, her breath catching in her throat and her thoughts spinning like a storm, miles away in a different part of the city, someone else's life was beginning to unravel in eerily similar fashion. Tyler, a former co-worker of the woman from her brief stint at a local electronics warehouse, had just gotten off his late shift and was checking his phone while waiting for the train at the downtown station. His inbox was typically cluttered with promotional emails and order confirmations, but tonight there was something strange, an anonymous message that read, "You're next if you don't keep quiet." He stared at the screen in disbelief, his mind immediately flashing back to a moment from months ago when she had confided in him about a side hustle that promised easy cash in exchange for light return work at department stores. At the time, he'd brushed it off as another one of her half-serious rants about beating the system. But now, with the message in front of him and a creeping sense of danger in his gut, he wasn't so sure. What troubled Tyler even more was the fact that the message didn't include any names or details, yet somehow felt personally directed. It was as if someone had been watching him, tracking his movements, waiting for the right time to send a warning. He started replaying their old conversations in his head, especially the ones about the strange man who used to pick her up outside the warehouse during lunch breaks. Tyler had asked about him once, jokingly, but she had deflected with a nervous laugh, saying he was just a friend from the old days who helped her out when things got tight. Now, he realized how little he really knew about her and how much he might have accidentally become entangled in something bigger than either of them. Meanwhile, back at the alley, the woman still hadn't moved from her spot. The cryptic woman who appeared and vanished as quickly as she came left her more rattled than the man she had been running from. The message she received, "Trust no one," looped in her mind like a siren. She didn't even know who was watching anymore. Every shadow felt threatening. Every glance from a stranger seemed loaded with meaning. She reached for her phone, desperate for answers, and began scrolling through old text chains, looking for anything she might have missed. That's when she found a buried voicemail from 3 days ago. It was muffled, hard to make out, but one phrase was clear: "The receipt numbers don't match the inventory database, someone changed them." It was from a former assistant manager she had worked with briefly, his voice shaky and strained. But that manager had been fired suddenly for procedural violations and disappeared from social media not long after. Could he have been silenced? Or worse? The deeper she dug, the more fractured the story became. The receipts, the fake returns, even the man who lured her into this, nothing added up anymore. Someone had gone to great lengths to alter records, cover digital footprints, and rewrite the narrative. If she had been part of a scam, it wasn't the one she thought it was. There was something larger at play, something more dangerous and organized. But the true question was who was really behind it. The more she thought about the mysterious man in the alley, the more she realized she hadn't actually seen his face. The shadows had hidden everything but his voice. And even that seemed unfamiliar now, distorted with purpose. That night, Tyler decided to act. He called her, his voice low and urgent. "I got a message," he said. "They're watching me too." The line went quiet for a beat. "We have to talk. There's more you don't know. I saw something at the warehouse, something weird on the inventory reports. They didn't just fire me, they threatened me too." The woman felt the air thicken around her. If Tyler was involved, even peripherally, it meant the web was wider than she thought. Maybe they weren't targeting just her. Maybe it was anyone who knew too much. And now Tyler might be in danger, simply because of what he saw and who he talked to. As they arranged to meet in a public place, neither of them noticed the silent van parked across from their respective locations. No logos, no plates, just tinted windows and the faint glow of a screen from the dashboard. Inside, someone watched their every move, fingers tapping on a keyboard, headphones tuned into their call. When Tyler hung up, the figure in the van leaned back, whispered something into a mic, and turned up the volume. In this twisted game of surveillance, betrayal, and buried secrets, every move they made was already being predicted and possibly manipulated. And as the woman walked out of the alley and disappeared into the night, unaware that Tyler's message had triggered a chain reaction, her phone buzzed one more time. This time it wasn't a warning, but a location pin, an abandoned factory on the edge of town, marked only with 2 words, "Truth awaits." But as she stared at the screen, wondering whether to go, another thought crept in: what if this wasn't a lead, but a trap? She hadn't been able to sleep. After receiving the location pin and the cryptic message, "Truth awaits," her body felt like it was operating in a different rhythm, a sharp contrast to the rest of the world that seemed to move along blindly, unaware of the threats crawling beneath its surface. The weight in her chest grew heavier with each passing hour, but it was the silence that unnerved her the most. The phone had gone quiet. Tyler hadn't followed up, and when she tried calling, it went straight to voicemail. She told herself he probably just lost signal, or maybe his phone died, but deep down, she knew something was wrong. He had sounded spooked. People don't just disappear after saying, "They threatened me too." She tried not to think about it, but every time she looked at the location pin still glowing on her screen, a chill crept up her spine. It felt less like a breadcrumb and more like a baited hook. Unable to ignore her instincts, she headed toward the edge of the city, where the pin had dropped, a place she had never been, far from the busy streets and warm lights of the suburbs. The factory looked abandoned from a distance, its broken windows and rusted gates hiding whatever secrets festered inside. She parked her car in a gravel pull-off a block away, heart pounding, hands tight on the wheel as if gripping it might somehow keep her safe. The area was eerily quiet, but not the kind of quiet that felt peaceful. It was the kind that seemed to be holding its breath. She sat there for several minutes, trying to calm herself, but her anxiety grew with every second. She wasn't just nervous anymore. She was scared. Still, she had to know. She approached the gate, stepping carefully through the overgrown weeds and shattered glass that crunched beneath her boots. The moment she stepped inside, the air changed. It was damp, musty, and thick with the scent of oil and metal decay. Each creak of the floorboards echoed like a gunshot in the cavernous space, and every corner seemed darker than it should have been. She didn't find anyone inside. No signs of Tyler. No hidden clues. Just remnants of an old, forgotten building, except for a single, strange detail. In the center of the factory floor sat a chair, perfectly upright, with a phone placed neatly on the seat. Her heart dropped. It wasn't her phone, but she recognized the case, navy blue with a cracked corner, Tyler's. She sprinted forward and grabbed it, pressing the power button with shaking fingers. It turned on, but the home screen was locked with a new passcode. She tried the one she remembered him using, but it was no good. That's when she noticed the front camera was cracked and smeared, like it had been dropped or stepped on. As she stood there trying to make sense of it, the silence shattered, something clattered behind her. She spun around fast, phone still in hand, but there was no one there. Her pulse roared in her ears. She started to back away when a voice rang out from the shadows, distorted and cold, like it was coming through an old speaker. "You should have stayed out of this." The words echoed around her, disembodied and mechanical. She couldn't tell where they came from, but the message was clear. She turned and ran, not looking back until she burst through the doors and sprinted down the gravel path toward her car. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her chest burning, but she didn't stop until she was inside, doors locked, engine roaring to life. As she pulled away, her eyes caught something in the rearview mirror, a figure standing just beyond the factory gates, too far to see clearly, but still, undeniably watching her. By the time she made it back to her apartment, it was well past midnight. The lights were off, but something felt off. She scanned the parking lot, nothing unusual. But when she stepped inside and flipped the switch, she saw it. Her kitchen drawers were open, her mail scattered, and one of her cabinet doors was ajar. Someone had been there. She backed out slowly, heart hammering, and went straight to her neighbor's unit, knocking frantically. When Mrs. Halpern, the retired schoolteacher who lived next door, answered the door in her robe, she looked startled. "Did you see anyone go into my apartment?" the woman asked, breathless. Mrs. Halpern squinted at her, eyes narrowing. "No, but there was a man standing by your door earlier. I thought he was a delivery guy. He was gone by the time I looked out again." The woman felt a wave of nausea rise. Someone had broken in, searched her place, and left without taking anything. It wasn't about stealing, it was a message. The factory, the phone, the broken silence, it was all connected. And the deeper she went, the clearer it became. Someone was orchestrating everything. They weren't just trying to scare her. They were trying to control the narrative. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every noise made her jump, every creak of the floor or whisper of wind outside her window made her flinch. Her thoughts circled like vultures. Was Tyler even alive? Who was sending the texts? Why had the man in the alley said, "You shouldn't have come back"? What exactly was it she had come back to? Around 3:47 a.m., her phone buzzed again. No name. No number. Just a message that read, "If you don't stop, he'll be next." She stared at the screen, her hands trembling. The threat was no longer about her, it was directed at someone else. Maybe Tyler, maybe someone else she hadn't even thought about yet. Whoever was behind this wasn't bluffing anymore. This wasn't just about a refund scam. It was bigger. It was deeper. And it was darker than anything she had ever imagined. And then the phone buzzed again. This time, it was a photo. And what she saw in that photo made her knees buckle. But before she could react, the screen went black. Battery dead. Or maybe something worse. The next morning, as the woman sat in the dim light of her apartment, her head pounding and her thoughts scattered, she received a call. It wasn't from an unknown number, and for the first time in what felt like days, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she was about to get the answers she needed. She picked up the phone without hesitation, her hands still trembling from the night's events. The voice on the other end wasn't one she expected, but the familiarity of it sent a chill down her spine. "Are you still alive?" Tyler's voice was rough, strained, but unmistakably his. "Tyler, what the hell is going on? I thought you were." She didn't even know how to finish that sentence, her emotions spinning wildly. "Where are you? What happened? What's going on with all this?" There was a long pause. It felt like an eternity before he finally spoke again, the words coming slow, measured, almost too deliberate. "You don't get it, do you?" Tyler's voice cracked slightly, betraying a trace of fear that hadn't been there when they last spoke. "None of this is real. It's all been a setup. You were never supposed to find out." Her heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, a setup?" "Everything," he replied, voice low and filled with regret. "Everything you thought was happening, the refund scam, the factory, the messages, it was all orchestrated. But not by the people you think." He paused, and she could hear him breathing heavily, like he was pacing. "It was me. I was the one who set you up." The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible to comprehend. She wanted to scream, to throw the phone against the wall, but instead, she stood frozen, her thoughts crashing against one another like waves in a storm. Tyler, the one person she had trusted throughout this nightmare, the one person she had believed was trying to help, had been the one pulling the strings all along. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile truth he had just revealed. "Because you needed to find out," he said, and this time, his voice sounded cold, calculating, different from the man she thought she knew. "The whole thing, it's bigger than just you, bigger than us. It was never about the scam. It was about the message." His words came out in a rush now, like a dam breaking. "The people who wanted you involved, they've been watching you for a long time. They knew you'd dig, knew you'd get too close. And they wanted you to think you were in control." She could feel the ground shifting beneath her, the entire narrative of the past few days crumbling, breaking apart. "But Tyler, I don't understand. Why? Why drag me into this? Why not just?" "Because you were the key," he interrupted, his voice urgent now, almost pleading. "You don't get it, do you? You were the perfect pawn. I never wanted you to get this far, but I had no choice. They'll never stop. You're in this now, for better or worse. There's no getting out." The sound of the call cutting out abruptly sent a wave of panic through her. She scrambled to check her phone, but it was dead, no signal, nothing. Just a lifeless screen staring back at her. Her heart raced, and for the first time, she felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Tyler wasn't just a victim in this mess, he was part of it. But why? Why had he manipulated her into all of this? And who were these they he kept mentioning? She barely had time to process the betrayal when there was a knock at her door. Her body tensed, muscles frozen, heart slamming against her ribs. Slowly, she moved toward the door, trying to keep the panic out of her voice as she peered through the peephole. No one was there. But then she noticed it, an envelope, slipped under the door. Her breath caught in her throat as she reached for it, tearing it open quickly. Inside was a single piece of paper with a few words scrawled across it in bold, hurried handwriting. "You've been played. Trust no one. You're out of time." Her blood ran cold. She was being dragged deeper into something far darker than she could have imagined, and now it felt like the walls were closing in. Had Tyler been part of it from the beginning? Had he been the one to orchestrate the entire thing? And if so, what did that mean for her? Was she simply a pawn in a game that had long been set in motion, a game where no one could be trusted? But before she could even fully grasp the weight of the situation, another thought struck her. If Tyler had been behind it all, who was really pulling his strings? And if they were powerful enough to manipulate him, could she even hope to escape their grasp? As her thoughts spiraled, she glanced down at her phone again. The last message from Tyler played over and over in her mind. "The people who wanted you involved, they've been watching you for a long time." Who were they? And how much did they know? She suddenly felt the eyes of 1,000 unseen watchers upon her, suffocating her every move. And then, just as she was about to crumble under the weight of it all, the phone buzzed once more. This time, it wasn't a cryptic message. It wasn't a warning. It was a video. She hesitated, but with trembling hands, she pressed play. The video opened on a familiar face, Tyler. But something was wrong. His eyes were wide with terror, his breath ragged. Behind him, a dark figure stood, obscured by shadows. Tyler's voice shook as he spoke, but the words made her blood run cold. "Don't trust me," he said. "I didn't know it would end like this. I didn't know what they would do to you, to me." The figure behind him stepped forward into the frame, its face finally coming into view. It was a face she knew all too well. Her own. And in that instant, everything she thought she knew about this twisted game shattered, leaving only one chilling truth: she wasn't just a victim in someone else's game. She was the one being hunted, and she had been the target all along. The video ended abruptly. Silence filled the room. And in the thick quiet, she realized one horrifying truth. The person who had been manipulating Tyler, who had been controlling this whole thing, wasn't just someone else, it was her. Her heart was still racing, her thoughts scrambled in 1,000 directions, as she sat in her small apartment, staring at the blank screen of her phone, replaying the video over and over. The image of herself standing behind Tyler was burned into her mind, but it wasn't just the shock of seeing her own face that paralyzed her. It was the undeniable truth that someone, something, had been manipulating her from the very start, pulling strings she hadn't even known existed. The sense of being trapped deepened with every passing second. What was real anymore? Was she even in control of her own life? And who could she trust? Her mind went to Tyler, his voice so frantic in that video, his face pleading for forgiveness, for understanding. What had happened to him? Was he alive? Or had he been swept up in this twisted web of lies and danger, the same way she had been? The questions gnawed at her, but there was no answer. Only more confusion and the suffocating sense that she had been nothing more than a pawn in a game she didn't even know she was playing. A knock at the door jolted her from her thoughts. It was too soon for anyone to be checking on her, and given everything that had happened, her body instantly went rigid, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. She stood frozen for a moment, the blood rushing in her ears. Whoever was out there wasn't someone she trusted, not anymore. Hesitantly, she made her way to the door, peering through the peephole. The figure standing on the other side wasn't a stranger, and that's what made it worse. It was Noah. Her best friend. The one person who had always been there for her, the one person she had shared every detail of her life with. But now, seeing him standing there in the hallway, his eyes hollow and tired, her stomach twisted with dread. She hadn't spoken to him since the night everything had started spiraling out of control, and in the pit of her stomach, she knew that this moment wasn't going to be some simple reunion. This was a confrontation she'd been avoiding. She opened the door, her hands shaking, trying to keep the facade of calmness intact. "Noah," she whispered, forcing a smile. "What's going on?" He didn't greet her with a smile or the warmth she was used to. Instead, his face was pale, his jaw clenched tight as if he was trying to hold something back, something important. "I don't have much time," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We need to talk." Her mind raced with suspicion. Talk about what? The video. Tyler's sudden disappearance. The warning messages. She'd trusted Noah. Hell, she had confided in him more times than she could count. But now, standing in front of him, all of her suspicions began to surface. Had he known more than he'd let on? Had he been involved in this, in the chaos that had consumed her life? Her pulse quickened, but she refused to let her fear show. "Not yet." "What is this about, Noah?" she asked, her voice betraying none of the turmoil inside. "What's really going on?" He looked around nervously before stepping inside, closing the door behind him. The tension in the room was palpable, suffocating her, and she could see that Noah was struggling with something. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to compose himself, but the tremor in his hands told a different story. "Look, I don't know how to explain this," he said, taking a deep breath. "But everything you think you know, it's not true. You're in way deeper than you realize." Her mind reeled. "What do you mean, deeper? What aren't you telling me?" He paused, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. "I never wanted to get you involved in this, but it's too late now. You're already part of it. You've been marked." "Marked?" she repeated, her voice rising with panic. "What are you talking about? What did you do?" Noah ran a hand through his hair again, his frustration and fear evident. "You don't understand. There's no easy way to explain this, but there's a group, people who've been watching you, controlling everything from the start. The factory, Tyler's messages, the phone calls, it's all been designed to get you here, to get you ready." His voice faltered as he took another step closer, his eyes wide with an intensity she'd never seen before. "They knew you were too clever, too stubborn to ignore the signs. They knew you'd figure it out. And now it's happening, whether you want it to or not." She stepped back, shaking her head in disbelief. I don't understand. You're telling me that everything, the refund scams, the threats, the video, was all planned by them? And you're just telling me this now?" Noah's gaze dropped to the floor, and for a brief moment, he seemed like the person she used to know, the person she could trust. But that feeling evaporated the instant he met her eyes again, his face hardening. "You have to make a choice. Right now." He moved closer, his voice lowering to a whisper. "There's an ultimatum. They're giving you one chance to walk away, to forget everything, to disappear. You go to a new city, a new life. Forget this mess, forget Tyler, forget all of it. Or, you keep digging. And the consequences will be worse than anything you can imagine." Her breath hitched as his words sank in. She had thought she had control over her own fate, that she could uncover the truth and somehow make things right. But now, Noah was telling her that there was no easy way out. The moment she started asking questions, the moment she stepped into this mess, it was too late. There was no running, no safety. She was trapped, and the truth was now a dangerous game, one with stakes higher than she could have ever imagined. "I can't just walk away," she said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound calm. "I need to know what's going on. I need to know who did this." Noah's face hardened, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that terrified her: desperation. "If you don't take the offer, it's not just your life on the line. It's everyone's. They'll make sure you regret it." A cold shiver ran down her spine. The truth was no longer just about her safety. It was about something larger, something more sinister, and as the weight of that realization pressed down on her, she had to face the unthinkable. Either she walked away from the truth, or she risked losing everything. But Noah's next words shattered any illusion of safety. "You don't understand," he whispered, stepping back, his eyes filled with an almost pleading fear. "They already know where you are. You never should have made that call." The room suddenly felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in around her, and she realized then, with cold clarity, that there was no turning back now. The urgency in Noah's voice was unmistakable, but it didn't hit her fully until she saw the panic in his eyes. The walls of her apartment seemed to close in, every breath she took suddenly feeling too thick, too suffocating. She could feel it then, the weight of everything that had been building up over the last few days, pressing down on her until she couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. She had been trying so hard to untangle the mystery, but now, standing there in front of Noah, she realized that the web wasn't just tangled. It was suffocating. The danger wasn't just surrounding her, it was inside her world, inside the people she thought she could trust. Noah's warning hit her like a punch in the gut, and for the first time, she truly felt how deep this conspiracy went. "They already know where you are," he said again, his voice low but firm, like it was a fact he didn't want to admit but knew it was too late to deny. "And they're not just watching you anymore. They're watching all of us." Her mind spun with the implications of that simple statement. "All of us," she echoed, trying to keep her voice steady despite the rising panic in her chest. "You mean Tyler, too?" He nodded, but his expression darkened, as if he wasn't ready to reveal everything. "It's bigger than Tyler. It's bigger than you and me. This thing is, it's everywhere." He stepped closer, his hand shaking slightly as he reached out to grip her arm. "It's not just one person pulling the strings, it's a network. A network that's been infiltrating everything, manipulating people, turning them against each other. You don't even know who you're dealing with." Her thoughts crashed together, the pieces not yet clicking into place, and for a split second, she thought she might collapse under the weight of it all. The messages, the video, Tyler's disappearance, Noah's confession, they all suddenly felt so small compared to the enormity of what he was saying. This wasn't just about a single scam. This wasn't just about some faceless, shadowy people trying to cover their tracks. This was a well-oiled machine, a vast conspiracy that reached deeper than she could have ever imagined. And she was in the center of it. Before she could voice another question, the door to her apartment slammed open, and her breath caught in her throat. A man stepped inside, tall and imposing, his face partially obscured by shadows. He wasn't someone she recognized, but the way he moved, the confidence he exuded, told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't here by accident. Noah's face went pale as he backed away. "I didn't think they'd find us so soon," he whispered, his eyes flickering with fear. The man didn't look at Noah. His gaze was locked on her, and she felt the weight of it, like he could see straight through her, like she was exposed, vulnerable. He wasn't here for a conversation. He wasn't here for a warning. He was here to finish something. "You've been digging too deep," the man said, his voice deep and smooth, but with a cruel edge. "And now, you've caused a problem." The words struck her like a slap in the face. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her thoughts were racing, scrambling to find the right thing to say, to make sense of the terror crawling up her spine. Who was this man? What did he want? What was he talking about? "You're not in control of this," the man continued, taking a step forward. "You think you are, but you're just another pawn. Just like Tyler. Just like Noah. Just like everyone else who's been sucked into this mess." His eyes were cold, devoid of any empathy, and for a brief moment, she saw the truth in his gaze, the truth that everything she thought she knew was a lie, that nothing had been real. She felt her stomach twist, the bile rising in her throat. "What do you want from me?" she finally forced out, her voice shaking, but her mind still trying to piece together what she was hearing. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer her question directly. Instead, he turned his eyes to Noah, and in that instant, everything clicked. Noah wasn't just a bystander. He wasn't just a friend who had gotten caught up in something bad. He was part of it. His face twisted in a mix of guilt and fear, and she could see that he had known what was coming, he had known all along. "You should have walked away," the man said to Noah, his voice cold and harsh, like he was scolding a child. "But now it's too late for that." He turned back to her. "And for you, too." Noah stepped forward, his hands raised in a defensive gesture. "I never wanted this. I thought I could protect you, keep you out of it. But I couldn't. I'm sorry." Before he could finish, the man raised his hand, cutting him off. "It's done now," he said, his tone final. "There's no going back. You either accept the consequences or you disappear. But know this, there's nowhere you can run that we won't find you." The man stepped closer to her, and with each movement, her heart pounded harder in her chest. She was running out of time. Running out of options. Her whole life had been upended, and she was being forced to make a choice she couldn't even begin to understand. Was there even a way out? Was there any part of this she could control? "Noah," she whispered, barely able to keep her voice steady. "What did you do?" But before Noah could answer, the man's voice cut through the air again. "She knows too much now, Noah. It's over." In that moment, the weight of everything, Tyler's betrayal, Noah's role in all of this, the messages, the video, the hidden people behind everything, came crashing down. The stakes were higher than she ever could have imagined. She wasn't just tangled in someone else's scheme anymore. She was at the center of something so vast, so dangerous, that if she didn't act, if she didn't make the right decision now, she might not survive long enough to figure out the truth. And as the man's shadow loomed over her world narrowed to one terrifying truth: there was no way out. The tension in the room was suffocating, and every inch of her body screamed for her to run. But there was nowhere to go. The man, this stranger, this threat that had loomed over her life for what felt like forever, was standing mere feet from her. His presence felt like a dark cloud closing in, and yet, somewhere deep within her, something fierce burned. It wasn't fear anymore. It was rage. It was the need to understand, to make sense of everything that had been twisted around her until she no longer recognized her own life. Noah had already stepped back, his face pale and broken. She could see the regret in his eyes, the way he was grappling with his own guilt, but she couldn't afford to dwell on him anymore. He was part of the equation, but no longer the most important part. What she needed now wasn't answers from him, it was answers from this man, this shadow who had been pulling the strings, orchestrating everything from behind the scenes. "I want to know the truth," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the storm raging inside her. "Who are you? What is this all about?" The man's lips curled into a tight smile, as if he'd been expecting her to ask this question, as if it was the moment he'd been waiting for. He stepped closer, and the chill in his eyes was enough to freeze her blood. "You think you've been playing a game, don't you?" he said softly, his voice smooth like honey but laced with venom. "But it's never been a game. This is much bigger than you, bigger than me. You've been a pawn in a war you couldn't possibly understand." Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the words, but all the pieces felt out of place, scattered and too far apart. "War," she whispered, but it was more to herself than anything. "What are you talking about?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small device, a flash drive. Her eyes locked onto it, her pulse quickening as she saw him slide it across the table toward her. "This," he said, as if revealing the key to it all, "is everything you need to know. Every secret, every lie, everything that's been building behind the scenes, all the people who've been working against you." He paused, his smile widening. "It's all here. You can't run from it anymore." Her instincts screamed at her not to touch it, to walk away, to leave this mess behind. But she couldn't. Not now. Not after everything. She reached for the flash drive, her fingers trembling, her heart pounding with the weight of the decision. As she grasped it, she felt the sharp sting of the moment, like she had just made a choice that would change everything. "You think this will explain everything?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You think this is going to make me understand why my life's been torn apart?" The man's eyes gleamed, and for a moment, it almost looked like he was enjoying this, like he was savoring her confusion, her desperation. "It's not about understanding. It's about control. You've been under our control for longer than you realize." Something inside her snapped. The tension that had been building over days, over weeks, boiled over into a fire that burned brighter than her fear. "I'm not your puppet," she spat, her voice finally breaking free. "You won't control me." The man's expression shifted, his cold smile faltering for just a moment before he regained his composure. He moved toward her, his movements measured, deliberate. "You already are controlled," he said, his tone almost pitying. "You just don't know it yet." Her mind was reeling, but the sudden pressure on her chest, the urgency, the need to end this, to make sense of it all, pushed her forward. She turned the flash drive over in her hand, examining it, and with a trembling hand, she slid it into the laptop that was sitting on the table in front of her. The screen flickered to life, and she watched as files, endless streams of data, began to flood onto the screen. She scanned through them, her breath quickening as the weight of the information hit her with full force. Names, faces, dates, so many people she knew, people who had been part of her life in ways she'd never understood. The people she had trusted, the people she had worked with, and even some of the closest friends she'd made over the years, they were all connected to this. To him. To the organization that had been orchestrating everything from the shadows. She wasn't the only pawn in this game. She had been chosen for a reason, targeted because she was useful. Then, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Her eyes widened as she read a name, one that should have never been there, one that made everything she thought she knew about her life crumble. Noah's name. Not as a victim, not as someone who had been manipulated, but as someone complicit. He had been working with them. He had known all along. Her heart stopped. Noah, she whispered, the betrayal sinking in like a knife in her chest. He didn't meet her eyes. His gaze was locked on the ground, his hands shaking slightly at his sides. The truth had come crashing down, and it was too much for him to deny anymore. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice strained. "I never wanted you to get hurt. But I couldn't let you walk away from this. It's bigger than both of us. You don't understand what's at stake. You don't understand what you've done," she snapped, her voice rising, the pain of his betrayal mixing with the anger, the fear, the disbelief. "You put me in the middle of all of this. You put everyone at risk, and for what? For your own gain." Noah took a step forward, his face twisted in anguish. "You don't know what I've had to do to protect you. To protect us both. I had no choice, none of us did. This," he gestured to the laptop screen, to the files and the evidence that was now laid bare before her. "This is the only way out. The only way we all survive." But as he spoke, something in the corner of her eye caught her attention. A faint shadow, a quick flicker of movement. Her heart skipped a beat. Before she could react, a sharp, almost deafening sound filled the room, a gunshot. Time seemed to freeze, and everything shifted. Noah collapsed to the ground, the shock of the impact visible on his face. The man, the one who had been orchestrating this entire game, stood there, his gun still aimed at Noah, his face impassive. "This wasn't supposed to happen," the man said calmly, as though he hadn't just taken a life. "But you pushed me, and now it's over. The game is done." She was frozen in place, the truth of what had just happened sinking in slowly, painfully. She wasn't just caught in the middle of a conspiracy, she had just witnessed the ultimate betrayal, and now, the truth didn't matter anymore. There was only survival. The man turned to her, his cold eyes locking onto hers, and in that moment, she realized that the final twist wasn't just in what she had uncovered. It was in how the game had shifted. Now, it wasn't about the conspiracy. It was about her, and whether she would survive the next move. The days following the gunshot were a blur. The weight of Noah's betrayal, the life lost in front of her, and the flood of information she had uncovered all seemed to blend together into a storm of emotions that never quite settled. She had expected everything to collapse in the aftermath, to be swallowed by the mess of it all, but instead, she found herself standing at the edge of something quieter. Something that felt like peace, if peace could ever exist after all of this.